The metal taste hit my mouth first, sharp and bitter like I'd bitten my tongue. Then came Grandpa's voice slicing through the dinner chatter. "You've been getting disability payments for years." The wine glass tilted in my hand as every conversation at the table died. 23 relatives turned to stare at me, their faces blurring at the edges as heat rushed to my cheeks. "My name is Iris. I'm 28 and a warehouse worker. This is the story of how I made them finally see the daughter they'd been stealing from." The man standing behind Grandpa held a folder thick enough to contain a decade of lies. My parents wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom suddenly fascinated by her dinner roll, Dad studying his wine like it held answers. The silence stretched until I managed to whisper, "What do you mean?" That's when Stevens opened the folder. Growing up in my family felt like living in a house with invisible rules written in someone else's handwriting. My parents, Linda and Mark, divided their love with surgical precision. Emma got the larger portion, I got the leftovers. But I'd learned to survive on scraps. The pattern started early. At 12, I brought home a field trip permission slip requiring $35. Mom barely glanced up from sorting bills. "We can't do extras this month." 3 days later, Emma burst through the same kitchen door waving a dance class flyer. Mom's face lit up. "Of course, sweetheart, we'll make it work." Same month, same bills, different daughter. High school sharpened the divide. When Emma's laptop screen cracked during her junior year, Dad ordered a replacement that arrived within 48 hours. When mine died during finals my senior year, he suggested I learn to manage my time better at the library. The injury changed everything, though I didn't understand how much until tonight. Wet tile, a 20-pound box, and gravity. That's all it took to reshape my life at age 20. The warehouse floor felt like concrete against my back as I lay there, breath knocked clean out of my lungs. The sharp pain between my shoulder blades would become my constant companion, a reminder that some falls you never fully recover from. What followed was a masterclass in invisible suffering. Doctor visits on my lunch breaks, prescription bottles hidden in my purse because admitting pain felt like admitting weakness. Physical therapy appointments scheduled around work shifts because missing hours meant missing rent. The disability application process took months, but the payments eventually started. Money I never saw, though I didn't know that then. I showed Mom my first prescription bottle once, hoping for, I'm not sure what, concern, understanding. She glanced at the label and sighed. "You need to be tougher, Iris. Don't depend on anyone." Those words became my religion, self-reliance carved into my DNA until asking for help felt like betraying everything I was raised to be. Meanwhile, Emma's college applications got professional editing services. Her textbooks appeared without question. When she changed majors twice, necessitating summer courses, my parents called it finding herself. I took night classes at community college, stretching student loans like rubber bands, working warehouse shifts that left my back screaming by dawn. The memory that haunts me happened in our kitchen 2 years ago. I just finished a 12-hour shift, my spine feeling like someone had replaced each vertebra with broken glass. The prescription bottle rattled with 2 pills left, not enough to last until payday. Mom stood at the sink washing dishes from a dinner I'd missed. New granite countertops caught the overhead lights, part of the kitchen renovation they'd completed that spring. "Can you help cover this month's medication?" I placed the bottle on the pristine counter. She didn't turn around. "You're stronger than this, Iris. Don't be dramatic." Behind her, stainless steel appliances gleamed, untouched by struggle, purchased during the same month I'd skipped meals to afford my copays. That night, I sat on my apartment floor creating a budget from receipts and prayer, learning exactly where I ranked in my family's hierarchy of care. What I didn't know was that Grandpa had been watching this inequality for years, growing increasingly suspicious when my parents' lifestyle improved while I visibly struggled. After that kitchen renovation, he quietly hired a private investigator to trace their sudden financial improvements. Stevens had spent 2 months uncovering the paper trail that led to tonight. Now, staring at Stevens and his folder, I felt that same hollow recognition settling in my chest. The dining room felt smaller than it had moments before. Warm light cast shadows that seemed too sharp, too defined. My parents maintained their positions at the table's center, the gravitational force around which every family gathering orbited. Emma leaned into Mom's shoulder, phone in hand, annoyed by the interruption. Grandpa hadn't touched his food. His jaw was set in the determined line I'd inherited, the one that appeared when someone pushed us too far. Stephen stepped forward without introduction, professional, precise, terrifying. The folder opened with a sound like paper wings unfolding. The first document hit the table face up. Monthly payments, my name printed in official typeface. An address, my parents' address, not mine. Mom's signature authorizing deposits. A second sheet followed. Another year. Same pattern. Then another. These payments were issued to support Iris's medical condition, Stevens said, his voice carrying the weight of facts that couldn't be argued with. Every deposit was rerouted to this household. The investigation shows a clear pattern of financial exploitation spanning 8 years. The room contracted around those words. I watched color drain from Mom's face, watched Dad's shoulders curve inward like he was protecting himself from impact. Emma finally looked up from her phone, confusion creasing her forehead. We use that money for family expenses, Dad muttered. Stevens tapped his pen against the papers. For your daughter's vacation to Europe? For the kitchen renovation? For the SUV purchased 18 months ago? Emma needed, Mom started. The payments weren't for Emma, Grandpa cut in, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard him use. They were for Iris, for her medical care, her living expenses, her survival. Stevens placed the final sheet on the table, a summary spanning 8 years. Monthly deposits totaling $287,000. I stared at that number, larger than anything I'd ever imagined having access to, larger than the combined total of every struggle I'd endured, every pill I'd rationed, every meal I'd skipped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of calculations, realizations, the sound of a decade-long lie crashing down. But something else was happening inside me. Not the collapse I'd expected, but a strange, crystalline clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the problem. I wasn't too sensitive, too needy, too dramatic. I was just too trusting. Mom's voice cracked when she finally spoke. We thought she was managing fine on her own. She never asked for help. Because you taught her not to, Grandpa said. The truth of that statement hit like cold water. Every dismissal, every suggestion that I was being dramatic, every time they'd praised Emma's needs while minimizing mine. It had all been designed to keep me from asking for what was already mine. Stevens closed the folder. The accounts will be frozen pending investigation. Iris will be contacted directly regarding restitution. I stood before anyone could speak, my legs steadier than they'd been in months. The weight I'd carried, the shame of never being enough, never doing enough, never earning enough love, lifted like fog, burning off in morning sunlight. Iris, wait, Dad started. I turned to face them for what I knew would be the last time as their victim. For 8 years, you told me I was too weak to handle my disability, too dramatic about my pain, too dependent on others. My voice came out clear, stronger than I'd heard it sound in years. But I wasn't weak. I was surviving on a fraction of what I should have had while you built your lives on my suffering. Emma's face had gone pale. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I said, not unkindly, but without mercy. None of you did. Mom reached toward me, tears starting. We can fix this. No, I said, slipping on my coat. You can face it. There's a difference. Grandpa stood with me, his keys already in his hand. She doesn't owe you forgiveness. She doesn't owe you anything. 20 minutes later, sitting in Grandpa's car outside my apartment building, the silence felt comfortable rather than heavy. No radio, no conversation, just the sound of the engine cooling and the steady rhythm of our breathing. When he handed me a business card, his voice was gentle but firm. My lawyer, she's expecting your call. Grandpa? You're not taking charity, he said firmly. You're taking what was always yours. Inside my apartment, I spread Stephen's documents across my kitchen table. Each page told the story of a parallel life, the one I should have lived with adequate medical care, proper nutrition, the ability to focus on healing instead of survival. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything, every prescription I'd rationed, every meal I'd skipped, every opportunity I'd missed because I was too exhausted, too broken to pursue it. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the life I'd been denied and the strength I'd found despite that denial. 3 months later, I sat in a conference room across from my parents and their lawyer. The settlement paperwork lay between us like a bridge I'd built with my own hands. "We want to make this right," Mom said, her voice small in the sterile space. "You want to make this go away," I corrected. "There's a difference." The final amount was more than the original payments. It included interest, damages for medical costs I'd absorbed, and compensation for the decade of financial hardship they'd caused. The criminal investigation had been dropped in exchange for full restitution and a formal admission of financial exploitation. But the real victory wasn't the check I deposited that afternoon. It was walking out of that room knowing I'd never again mistake their neglect for love, their manipulation for family loyalty, their theft for complicated family dynamics. 6 months after the settlement, I bought a small house with a garden, real granite countertops that I chose myself, a medicine cabinet that stays stocked, space for the life I'd always deserved but never thought I could claim. Sometimes Emma calls. The conversations are awkward, filled with apologies I'm not ready to accept and explanations that don't change what happened. I'm polite but distant. We may share DNA, but trust isn't rebuilt with words alone. My parents tried reaching out through mutual friends, then through lawyers when I wouldn't respond directly. Grandpa cut ties with them completely after the settlement, telling me it was the first time in 68 years he'd been ashamed to call them family. Extended family members who witnessed that dinner revelation split into camps, some understanding my position, others believing I was too harsh for pursuing legal action. Some people call this outcome harsh. I call it boundaries. The scar tissue that forms around old wounds doesn't disappear. It just gets stronger, strong enough to protect what matters, strong enough to recognize the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. If you're reading this and recognizing pieces of your own story, remember this. Survival isn't noble when it's built on accepting less than you deserve. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is refuse to enable their version of love that requires your diminishment. The life you're living in the margins isn't humility. It's just smaller than you are. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to demand what's yours. You're allowed to stop making yourself small so others can feel large. Trust me on this one. I've got the receipts to prove it. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.